And she makes this snacks that could fit both even
Okay.
Maybe I'll let Larry do this.
I don't know how to do it without sounding weird.
Yeah.
Let me know.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome. I guess I'm kind of in charge. I know we have very limited time. At one point we were told 30 minutes, and I know that you're running behind. So I'm getting rid of formality. We're not even introducing you. Hopefully, as you get questions, if you'll just introduce yourself so that we can just get right into the question answer part, that would be great. So welcome. Obviously, we are a group that's very much supportive of the refugees here in Twin Falls and of our CSI Refugee Center and all that they are doing for the refugees. And we are hoping to grow this community-based organization so that we can make a stronger community and make Twin Falls a more welcoming place for our refugees. As the one in charge, I'm going to ask the first question, and then we'll go from there. My question is, with approximately a third of the Idaho refugees coming to Twin Falls, and 2/3 are going to being split between 3 agencies in Boise, I was just wondering how that's determined, how it's determined how many come to Twin Falls and how many stay in Boise, because obviously population-wise that density is very different. And if the support and funding is proportional to the number of refugees that go to each agency.
So let me start. So I'm Larry Bartlett from the State Department. So every year we have a proposal process for any agency, any national network that would like to be part of the resettlement program. And so it's over the last few years, actually more than that, there have been 9 national agencies that have successfully competed for that funding and that ability to resettle refugees. Each of them must have a number of affiliates around the U.S. We need to have some kind of economy of scale. So USCRI, which is working here in Twin Falls, will give us a proposal. They will say that this, we'd like to continue to operate this program here in Twin Falls. They tell us what they think the capacity is to operate that program. How are there enough jobs? Is there affordable housing? Do we have the staff? Do we have the language skills for the refugees we want to resettle? We then have a review panel that looks at this. Some of them are quasi-outsiders, so Jan has sat on that review panel before. We have people from ORR looking at that panel, and then going through each site at a very micro level, trying to decide whether or not we agree with the assessment, and whether, sometimes they want to grow it, sometimes they want to level it off. We always ask the state representative, in this case it's Jan, to give us their opinion on that proposal, and then we will make a final determination what the size of that place should be.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Lee Williams. I'm with the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants, which is one of those 9 national nonprofit agencies that works with the federal government for refugee resettlement. And the CSI Refugee Program has been our partner here in Twin Falls since it started the refugee program back in 1983. So as Larry mentioned, we go through an annual process of putting together a proposal to the State Department in terms of what the number of refugees that our network has the capacity to resettle. And at each site, there's a whole communication process that happens in between Zeze and his team and local stakeholders, such as the health department, the schools, police, other agencies, and also just the citizenry of the community to find out what the capacity is for refugee resettlement on an annual basis. So what's the impact on the schools? Can the schools handle kids who may need ESL in the health department? Do they have the capacity to make sure that people have all the immunizations they need and are on track? Working with the employers to make sure that there are jobs available and developing those relationships with the employers in the community so that people get employed in a timely fashion. the goal of the program is to have people to the point of self-sufficiency as quickly as possible. And really that's defined as there's a safe place for folks to live, kids are in school, and able-bodied adults have jobs. And they're earning enough of a wage so that they're not tapping into other social benefits. And I have to say that Zeze and his team at CSI do an amazing job in achieving the goal.
I'm Jan Reeves, and I'm with the Idaho Office for Refugees. My office is in the state capital of Boise, and we administer services and assistance for refugees wherever they may be in the state. With regard to the funding, we don't control all of the funding that comes into Idaho for refugees. There's the reception and placement funding that comes directly from USCRI to their affiliates in the state. There's matching grant funding that also comes from the Office of Refugee Resettlement to USCRI to their offices. But the funding that I manage is cash assistance for the first 8 months. We call it TRA, Transitional Refugee Assistance, and services for employment, case management, English language training, interpreter services, and various support services. And this money is allocated by formula. So in terms of parity between resettlement agencies in Boise and in Twin Falls, each agency receives their allotment of funding, the main core services funding, based on the population that they have and the numbers that actually the numbers that they have historically resettled in the past. So we created this formula to try to make sure that every refugee, not the agencies, we're not so concerned about the agencies having the funding they need, but that the resources are available for refugees wherever they are to become independent and self-sufficient within the shortest possible time.
What is the amount of time that it takes on average for a refugee to become self-sufficient?
It's very short in Twin Falls. It's a function of employment opportunity and refugees' readiness to be entering the workforce. And I would say in a good economy, like is especially the case here in Twin Falls, and it's getting better in the rest of the state, I would say within 4 to 5 months on average would be a good time frame. Some take longer than others, and we have a great diversity of job experience and education levels, literacy levels among different groups, so it isn't uniform by any means. But
I guess one of the kind of precepts of this program is that there's transitional assistance from the federal government, and largely states don't contribute to that. It is all federally funded, and so it comes either from the State Department on a per capita basis for the initial 30 days or 30 to 90 days, and then from Health and Human Services for up to 8 months. But it's done deliberately, frankly, so it's not full support. It's frankly considered partial support, and so it can support the first few months in a full way, but then it tapers off, and it really is meant to push refugees, frankly, to employment. And sometimes refugees aren't always ready, so there are special programs for that. But the point is to make them self-sufficient as early as possible so that they don't need additional services. They still have eligibility to school, other social benefits that any legal permanent resident would have, and certainly as they achieve citizenship as well. So they certainly can, as any person in Idaho can receive those benefits, they can as well. But the idea is to give them a little transitional assistance and then let them be self-sufficient. And by and large, refugees do quite well with that model.
So what happens to the family members, maybe that don't work, maybe they have an elderly father or mother with kids, do they get extra assistance because it's a family, but some of them, there's maybe one person working?
Seniors over 65 years of age are eligible for supplemental security income, pretty automatic. The challenge there is that in order to continue receiving that benefit, it's not a lot of money on a monthly basis, but it's some support, is that refugees need to become U.S. citizens after 7 years in order to continue to be supported by supplemental security income. So, but if you're not yet 65 and yet you consider yourself to be retired and not really wanting to work, that other family members would have to step up because there really is no other support system other than
so if it's at 65 or older.
Right. Or if someone is not able to work because of a medical condition,
that's what I was wondering.
then we'll apply for disability.
Right, there's disability support as well, in addition to being old.
Just wanted to.
Could you
I'm kinda
explain
told it.
something you just said about 7 years? I didn't catch all of that.
Oh, okay. From the date of U.S. entry, for 7 years, a refugee who is eligible for SSI, which is a cash benefit. Also, there's Medicaid that goes along with that for medical assistance. At the end of 7 years, that person would need to become a U.S. citizen in order to continue to be eligible for that benefit. So there's a window of opportunity to become a naturalized U.S. citizen. It's not easy for a lot of people to do that in 7 years, but it's the requirement.
A federal cash benefit, right?
Yes, that's
But
right.
it doesn't come from Social Security funds, it comes from the.
Right, it's
general
separate,
fund.
right. It's the Social Security Administration,
Right.
but it's a separate source of funding for supplemental security income versus your Social Security benefits.
So it comes out of the general fund of the U.S.
I'm not sure. Do you know exactly where that comes from?
I think so.
It's not part of the
Yeah.
Social Security Trust Fund. I mean,
Yes,
that's
yeah, I know.
that's protected and that's
Supplemental,
separate.
yeah.
Yeah.
Is that true of the Medicare part of it too?
Well, the Medicare, Medicare would, yeah. Well, see, Medicare requires, both Social Security and Medicare require that you work, you're part of the workforce for 40 quarters, which is, 10 years consistently working. So newly arrived refugees aren't going to be eligible for either Medicare or Social Security until they've reached that benchmark of 10 years of work. And by then, they're not refugees anymore. They're citizens and Idahoans.
So wait a minute, the guy behind you has a, oh no, we got it, sorry, Kate, go ahead, sorry.
My name's Bob Soika, and thank you very much for coming here. In some ways, I'm embarrassed that we've had to create this expense and bring folks here, and part of my question relates to the reason for that is we've got what at least we perceive as a relatively small, very vocal, negative group that has been stirring this issue for about the last 6 months. And I'd like to have your perception or your knowledge of to what extent what's going on here reflects what you're seeing in other communities that are accepting refugees. And are we in fact an outlier on the negative side? What are your suggestions about dealing with that?
So let me start. So again, I'm at the Department of State. We have a responsibility built overseas for identifying refugees, processing them, and then bringing them to the U.S. And a little bit on the domestic side, we are involved in the placement and the initial support. Let's see, the good news is you are an outlier, but you're not alone. Spartanburg, South Carolina is another place. If you Google it, you'll find media even today. The New York Times is running a story, probably tomorrow, on Spartanburg. Manchester, New Hampshire has had some negative voices. That was mostly from the mayor, frankly, and not really from the citizenry. Springfield, Massachusetts, another place, if you look on the internet again, largely from the mayor, I think, in Springfield. So sometimes what we've seen is, and actually the other place I'll mention is Amarillo, Texas. So again, another place I've been to talk with the community about refugees. And sometimes it's a political issue. So when mayors get involved and they're not welcoming or receptive, then it becomes about politics, and that's a little complicated to solve because maybe elections are coming up and they're using it as some kind of a campaign issue. What I would say in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I think Twin Falls, similar, there are some people who are not receptive to refugees. And they've, honed in on the idea that people are different, they're Muslim, they're possibly a security threat to our country. For the most part, people they're not really too concerned about refugees taking jobs, although maybe they should be because refugees work really hard and take jobs, take jobs, frankly, that other Americans don't. So it's perplexing in terms of trying to solve that problem. I mean, we're here today and we'll be here tonight to try to, impart the facts. I'm not sure all of it will be received, but we'll do our best to just lay out how the program works, and we're pretty honest about how it works. We've been accused of running a secret program. There's nothing secret. We'll meet with anybody who wants to know about the program. We have a very strong security check system to make sure that refugees aren't a threat to the United States, to make sure that we really are helping people who have been victimized by terrorists, not people who are terrorists. We have, a semi-adequate amount of funding to help refugees make this transition. Some people would say on the advocacy side say we don't do enough, that we actually provide more funding to help people really make this adjustment. People on the other side, I think, of the story would suggest that we don't give enough, or that we give too much, right? This is federal money, we've all paid our taxes, and why are we helping these people? So, finding that balance is hard.
Just to tell you, I pay federal taxes and I pay a lot, and I'm happy to have the money go to something that starting a war or whatever.
So my last little bit for you, and I think the rest of the people in this room is, we can come here from Washington and provide information. I'm not sure that the Washington story resonates very well sometimes at the local level, because again, the perception, which is, I hope, entirely false about people in Washington, because I didn't always live in Washington, so I'm from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm a real person too. But I think
30-year Fed employee retired.
but the story here is local, and so we can come here and pitch and emote, and we can do it as well as anybody.
Right?
But to meet a refugee, to see a company, frankly, that values refugees, to see a company that just gave $25,000 to the organization to help them help refugees. I mean, that's the story, frankly, that will resonate here in Twin Falls.
Look, and I thank you, and it is very much a dog whistle issue for politics here, and we put this icing on top of the political cake to pretend that it's not politics, but it is about politics.
Yeah.
So.
And which is a good reason to be vocal with your elected officials and representatives as well, because they're hearing a lot of the other side of the story. And unless they hear enough from people like you who are supportive, who believe it's a very worthwhile effort, it's going to be an unbalanced picture that they're going to get. So,
okay, I want to know what you were going to say. I know you haven't been able to get it out.
No, that's okay. I'm Ken Toda. I'm from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. I wanted to follow up on your first question. So as much as our cash assistance level is time limited, a lot of our social service supports go on for a much longer period of time. So they go on actually up to 5 years. So if a refugee needs continued ESL, needs continued job with vocational employment or career advancement and some other specialized programs to really help them advance, those services are still there, and those are provided through the resettlement agency. On the kind of the community, maybe something to think about. So we have a technical assistance provider through our office that's called Welcoming America, and they've done a lot in terms of framing the conversation in a community to really create a welcoming community, and they might be helpful in sort of looking, and we can have them come here and really maybe help generate that conversation. If anything, it helps you put a plan together to be a welcoming community. Maybe most of the community is supportive of that, but I think it'll help you at least frame some of that discussion. So
that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah, when we have been talking with Jan about starting and working on that a little bit. So it's kind of the framework.
Well, the initiative in Boise is known as Neighbors United, and you may have all heard that name. And exactly, it's exactly an effort to develop a community plan that really promotes self-sufficiency, long-term integration, resource development for refugees in the community to help them become full-fledged partners, members of the community, and citizens over time. So we're happy to be of help as well. And we've been actually, through our office, working with Welcoming America. And if Ken can get them here, I'll welcome them as well.
What agency is that under again?
Office of Refugee Resettlement.
So Health and Human Services.
Yeah. They have a great website.
Let's go this way.
Well, thank you. And there's a lot of it,
Yeah, there's a lot of information.
So I just had a question about, when we talk, or when I'm in the community talking to people, and something that we've discussed in this meeting is, do you or do any of you have any data on like the long-term, like post-graduation, or so to speak, data on the economic impact, or on the, community impact of the people who do settle in our communities? Because, you know, when you talk to people and they want to make really broad generalizations about how these people impact our communities that are, I think, baseless and untrue.
Are you talking about in Twin Falls in particular, or
In
just
particular,
in general?
yeah, because that's where I live. That, you know, those are
Sure.
the people that I speak to. But.
I don't know. Say it's the
We
college.
should talk about the
students.
You know, I think we need to maybe engage some researchers from CSI or BSU, and we actually have a good relationship with Boise State.
Just on the sort of shorter term though, so we do measure kind of employment outcomes from some of this initial employment and through the match grant program. And your match grant program is probably one of the most successful programs in the country. I think it's 93% self-sufficient at 180 days, which was really a great testament to the work of the resettlement agency, but really the community and the employers you have here. So.
Right. And I would just mention, the Cleveland Foundation, within the last year and a half, came out with a great study of refugee resettlement in Cleveland and surrounding county. And the result was that for every dollar that is put into a refugee resettlement, the community gets $10 in revenue within the first year. And that's available if you go to the Cleveland Foundation website. It'll be out there. It's a really insightful report.
And sometimes what people forget is, you know, refugees pay rent.
Right.
And taxes.
And the people
And they
who
shop.
and taxes and the people who own those places they're
Buy
renting
food and
are people
rent.
from Twin Falls, right? I mean, those are local citizens who are benefiting from refugee resettlement, and they always pay taxes because, for the most part, they have jobs.
Well, and so I got into town yesterday morning, and I've been running around with Cesar, and one of the things I mentioned to him, I was surprised at the number of Thai restaurants in Twin Falls. We say, well, yeah, a lot of those are actually, you know, former clients, Burmese refugees who resettled and have set up businesses here, and are, you know, providing services to the community and creating jobs. And
Back to your question about the long-term economic impact, there is a whole series of fact sheets that was put out by the American Immigration Forum, state-by-state analysis of the economic impact contributions that immigrants and refugees have made, and there's it's really interesting. I mean, it's hard to segregate the refugee part from the immigrant part, but I think in general, foreign-born people in our state have generated more economic activity, have started businesses at a faster rate, and have otherwise contributed to the economic growth of the state that's disproportionate, greater than their actual numbers. So I'd be happy to share that report with any of you, and it might be useful.
That'd be great.
good.
I have a couple housing questions about refugees, and this is from the Executive Director of Intermountain Fair Housing Council in Boise. So she sent these. One of them, during initial resettlement, what kind of housing choice does a refugee agency give to refugees that is affordable, accessible, healthy, in neighborhoods with access to transportation, good schools, medical services, jobs or income, grocery stores, and other basic needs? And then my follow-up question to that is going to be, if these refugees have any housing issues, who are they taking those issues to? Because we're not hearing about them at Intermountain Fair Housing Council or too much at Idaho Legal Aid Services.
Well, we have a case manager that is in charge of that. You know, you don't hear those issues because in Twin Falls, we don't have those issues. We don't have any housing issues here.
Yes, you do. The housing the refugees are in have no screens on the windows are broken, the heat is inadequate. There's so many problems with the housing. If you go by the housing where our refugees are housed, you just weep for them. It's crummy housing.
Well, would you give me a specific example?
Yeah, the brown story house on 2nd Street. The whole building is terrible. I was there not last week.
What's the name of C Street? No, it's not C Street Manor. What's the name of that place?
No, the brown building.
Across from Preside.
Yeah, across from
Yeah, it is
Preside and
horrible.
Sushi. Yeah, I was there 2 days ago, again. And the screen doors down, the rails are kind of shaky, and they have kids in there. And I was a little busy with a project, but I was gonna call this week.
See, and I'll agree with you with that, because sometimes we place them in homes and then they have to move to find a very cheap place. That is a very, very, very cheap place, and most singles, that's where they go. It's not families. So we place them in safe and affordable housing, and then they find those, even the red building that we have on 2nd Avenue, they move themselves in those, and that is after.
I have been in that red building though. I have been to the same red building. The standards don't fit the code.
Do they have any knowledge that they have housing rights, that there is Idaho Legal Aid Services and Intermountain Fair Housing who will advocate for their housing rights and try and get them decent housing? Because they are in substandard, crummy housing.
Well, you know, after the 8 months, once they graduate from our program, they are free to move in any housing they want. And those are refugees that are choosing those cheap places. It's not us choosing those.
But maybe there's something more that can be done here.
You're right, and that's what we're trying to do here and trying to create is that we saw this in the community is that Zay does a great job getting them here, getting them established, and then they graduate from the program. And as many of us know, you can't assimilate to a whole new culture, language, and everything in 8 months to a year. It's just not possible. So we need to create more community help for these refugees. We need to get this plan in place so that they know if there's a housing issue, they know where to go. They know who to ask if there's issues at school.
We're doing their disability cases. We're doing domestic violence work for them. I think we have good, they know.
Karen works for Idaho Legal Aid.
Several of us are here from Idaho Legal Aid Services. And we are actively doing Social Security cases and other benefit cases. But we are seeing almost no housing cases. And I drive by there and you know.
What are their choices when they first come here? Where do they go?
Well, we find a house prior to arrival, and we do a self-check to make sure that the house is checked. And we have a person that works with all these landlords. Now, if you visit a new arrived refugee, then you will see a different story. And I'm not saying that they don't live in those places that she's talking about, but that is after the initial resettlement. So, but what she's talking about is they don't have someone to advocate for them for those rights, and I agree with that.
Right.
But for all our new arrived refugees, you would find them in actually houses. We don't place them in apartments.
So you didn't place them in those places.
No.
They went there after their 8 months?
Yes.
But the question about what they know and what about their rights.
And maybe it is, we need to be in
I think it is an
partnership.
education question
to
and an orientation question, and maybe that's something, if you do develop a community plan, that you can work with the CSI Refugee Center on making sure that there are
and I'm willing to partner with
other housing
you so we
options.
can
What are
do
the other
something
options?
about it.
Well, there's also Habitat for Humanity. We built a home in partnership with a refugee family, and totally successfully. And then, of course, we've got a lot more applications. Why wouldn't we?
Right. That's great.
And we're willing to do that. We only build 2 houses a year in this community. It takes a couple $100,000 to build 2 houses. So we have to do a lot of fundraising up front. But that would be at least something, you know. And frankly, if this community wanted to build a house, Habitat knows how to build a house, and we have, you know, plans for very good, affordable home ownership houses. Phil and I both could help you there.
We have a program that actually helps refugees save for home ownership, so maybe there's some.
And it exists here.
Right, that's right.
It's the IDA, the Individual Development Account program, and it's a grant that was received for asset development for refugees in the state, and actually Alexandra Popovich, who is the staff person for the Refugee Center, is managing that program for Twin Falls. And we have, I think home ownership is one of the largest uses of that savings, and it's not enough to pay for a house, but it's enough to get you into a house, pay the down payment, closing costs, and it is being used here in Twin Falls on a very regular basis.
That's good.
You gentlemen are a wealth of information. I'm just curious, is your collective knowledge relative to community interface, is that available on a website, in a document, something that rather than kind of hitting you hit and miss with questions that we can go to and absorb in an organized fashion?
I think maybe it depends on the issue. So, you know, how does the program work? We would have that, I think, on our website. There's, you know, Q's and A's. We've got something about our Syria program on the website, so if people have concerns about that, there's another piece of information. But otherwise, it may be more singular.
And Welcoming America has a terrific website.
Yeah.
With, you know, that deals with many, many aspects of newcomers and integration of newcomers into the community. I highly recommend that.
The OR website has a lot of the background program information, but I think when we're trying to develop some Q&A that might be helpful sort of more at your level to sort of talk about the OR programs and services, and then maybe what some of the outcomes are. I think those
Who
are a
would
lot
be
of
the contact person for you guys, for us, for Intermountain Fair Housing Council to get?
I would just go through Jan, frankly.
Sure.
Okay, Reeves, Jan?
State coordinator.
Are you both in Twin Falls?
Well, no,
No,
I'm the state refugee coordinator.
Okay, in Boise.
And so I'm in Boise. Zay is your local contact
Okay.
here, but
Is
either
Ron
one.
Black still?
No.
Ron,
You
replaced
replaced
Ron.
Ron, okay. Good.
I have a question. Well, on top of that, anyway, any houses that Zezia sent me to anyway to assist the refugees has not been bad. It's the others that I've seen that's
Okay.
bad. So
That's good to know.
the ones you sent me were not so bad.
He only sent you the good ones.
You sent me to the good ones. Conspiracy. Anyway, I do have a question on the domestic aspect of it. What kind of education are they getting before they get on the domestic and aspect of it? Because they're being held back a little bit from what I have seen. They're held back, and I'm wondering if is there a program that they're told if they come here, there's a certain level of level or standard they have to meet.
So before they arrive?
Yes,
what
if
we
they
do?
are.
Okay.
Yeah, because when they come here, it's kind of very hard.
Yeah.
Domestic
So
aspect.
frankly, what we do from the State Department side, and we're funding that program, and we implement it through implementing partners overseas, we provide, this could sound terrible, 1 to 5 days of orientation. So if you can imagine moving from wherever you are overseas to the United States, it's not much, right? So, but, and frankly, a lot of it is now focused on the initial period of time that I'm going to be in this new country. So part of it is how do I get on a plane and how do I use the plane while I'm on it, because a lot of people haven't flown before. And then what are the first initial days, 30 days or so, going to be like when I arrive in Twin Falls? People have asked us to do English language training. That would be wonderful, but we don't have the budget to do that. So we've done a little bit for Congolese, but for the most part, people won't really be able to get English language training. And then the other piece of it, which is very dependent on where you've been a refugee. So if you know Bhutanese refugees who've arrived here, one is working at the organization. They've had English language in the schools in the camps in Nepal for 20 years. And so if you were a student, I mean, if you were beyond school age, then you didn't learn English. But if you were a student during the last 20 years, you actually come with pretty good English. A lot of refugee camps will have education programs, but it'll be in the local language. So Arabic or one of the Congolese languages, depending on where you are. So people have different levels of education and then different levels of language. And that, frankly, has to be addressed upon arrival here.
So I know people's concerns are, and I've heard this in the community, well, how do they vet people in a refugee camp? Because they have no papers, they've been here maybe their whole life or whatever. How do you vet someone who doesn't really have a background?
Sure. There's a couple different things. One, I mean, not all refugees have no documentation, but certainly some don't.
Right.
I mean, people flee without anything.
Right.
Some people have a ton of documentation, so Syrians, Iraqis, have quite a bit of, national ID cards and passports. So one of the things is we take their information and we take, their name, the spelling of their name, we take the date of birth as best it can be established. We take all the information about their family and extended family. If they have relatives or acquaintances in the U.S., we take that information as well. All of that is run through security databases. I suppose somebody could give us a false name, but frankly, when you've got a whole family in front of you, it wouldn't be that easy to do that. Everybody is fingerprinted. Those fingerprints are run through 3 different databases. One includes the Department of Defense, who's collected people's fingerprints in places like Iraq, not just on, say, a bomb, but also just people who might have worked at a military base and other encounters they've had with the Defense Department. And all of that can help establish the veracity of the story. So if somebody, and even, we run things through the State Department Consular database, so if people have applied for a tourist visa at some point in their life, that would be in our system. And then if people say, well, I never left Iraq, but then we find somebody's applied for a visa in Amman, Jordan, then their story doesn't hold up. So there's all kinds of ways that we look to see if the story is credible. Every single refugee receives an interview with the Department of Homeland Security officer. It's not a contractor, it's somebody who's a federal employee who flies out around the world to over 66 locations and does an in-depth interview. For Syrians and Iraqis, they do 3 interviews a day, so they're 1.5 hour interviews. The entire family is interviewed. There's a face-to-face interview. Their claim is taken. How did you flee Syria, for example? Where were you living? How did you get to where you wanted to go? Did you have to cross checkpoints? Did you pay any money to anybody? If you did, who was that person you paid money to? Where have you been living since that time? So they go in depth, understanding the history. Did you work for the military? If so, what was your position? And then there are ways that we try to correlate that story with information that's in U.S. databases. There's at least 6 national intelligence agencies that run this information through their databases against their holdings. It's a lot of the information is classified about how they do it, but neither the State Department or the Department of Homeland Security actually run the checks. These are agencies whose job, FBI is one, but National Counterterrorism Screening Center is another, that CIA is another, that will run against their databases and use their security experts to try to identify whether this refugee is a match with any of this data. So at the end of the day, the Department of Homeland Security is the one who makes the final determination that the person is a refugee and that they're admissible on security grounds. So, yeah, go ahead.
A follow-up to that is, has there ever been a refugee who has turned terrorist?
We have admitted people who have been found to have been terrorists. So the famous cases, there's 2 in Kentucky who were arrested, the Iraqis, probably 4 years ago, and convicted in an FBI sting operation. And since that time, what's happened is that a new security check was put in place to be able to try to ferret out people like that prior to arrival. That one involves some fingerprints, frankly, on an IED. And so that was another piece that has now been looked at, trying to rectify that.
Well, it looks like, I think our time is up. They're very scheduled, so.
Yes, thank you for reminding me.
So the one thing I would say about security for everybody is that there is no U.S. government program that is zero risk. And there is nothing in this country that is zero risk. So we're cognizant of that. The FBI, frankly, has concerns about, and the FBI has been quoted in testimony that they have concerns about being able to vet people. But one of the responses of this administration, which includes the FBI, is to make sure that they have the ability to follow up cases if they need to once people have arrived. So we'll do our best to be as perfect as possible, but we'll understand that there are risks, and then we will try to address those risks as they come up.
Well, we thank you for joining us and letting us ask questions one-on-one, because I know that tonight those questions are going to be pre-done, so.
Thank you.
We'll let you guys go.
Thank you.
Address the fact that people are saying there's no opposition on the panel tonight, and a lot of the opponents are not showing up because
We're not, we're just giving massive slides.